William did not raise his voice. He did not make a speech. He did not, as far as anyone outside a very small circle knows, say a single unkind word about the woman at the center of all this. He simply signed a plan for the future, a quiet, careful document about the shape of the monarchy in the years to come, and buried inside it, without fanfare, was the one thing that could unravel everything Queen Camilla has spent the last 20 years so carefully building. Because the plan describes a monarchy after Charles, a smaller one, a leaner one, a monarchy remade in William's image, with fewer working royals, fewer grand roles, and a much shorter list of the people who truly matter to it. And in that new order, according to accounts later described within the household, the place that Camilla had assumed would always be hers, the honor, the standing, the quiet security of a former queen looked after by the family she married into, is nowhere to be found. She is not attacked in it. She is something worse. She is left out. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. To understand why a single document could be such a nightmare for Camilla, you have to understand how much of her future depends on the goodwill of a man who does not control it yet, but one day will. And that man is not her husband, it is her stepson. Camilla's position today rests on Charles. He is the king, and while he reigns, her place is absolute. She is his queen, protected by his authority, secured by his devotion, unquestioned in the role she waited most of her adult life to hold. For as long as Charles sits on the throne, nothing about Camilla's standing is in any real doubt. But kings do not reign forever, and the hardest truth of Camilla's whole situation, the one that sits quietly beneath every honor she now holds, is this: the day Charles is gone, everything she is passes into the hands of the one person in the family with the least reason to protect it. On that day, William becomes king. And a queen without a king is entirely dependent on the kindness of whoever wears the crown next. That is the fear the document brought to life, not a fear of today, a fear of the day after tomorrow. For years, the assumption inside the household had been comfortable and unspoken. Camilla had won her place. The battles were over. The public had, slowly and grudgingly, come to accept her, and when the time came, she would step gently into the role of a beloved elder stateswoman of the family, a former queen treated with the dignity her long service had earned. That was the future everyone assumed was waiting for her. It was never written down. It never had to be. It was simply understood. And understandings, in this family, are only ever as strong as the person who inherits them. When William quietly began to sketch the monarchy he intends to lead, he was not thinking about Camilla at all. Those close to him insist. He was thinking about survival. He has said, again and again, to the small group of people he trusts, that the monarchy cannot continue in its current shape, that it is too large, too expensive, too exposed, too easy to attack. He wants fewer royals doing more meaningful work. He wants a crown that costs less and justifies itself more. He wants, in short, to hand his own children an institution lean enough to survive a century that will forgive nothing. It is a noble aim. It is, most people would agree, exactly the kind of thinking the monarchy needs. But a plan to shrink a family always contains a quiet, brutal question. And that question is simple: who gets cut? And when William's advisors followed the logic of his own vision to its natural end, the answer that kept appearing was the one no one wanted to say out loud. It is worth being precise about what a plan like this actually involves, because from the outside the phrase, a slimmed-down monarchy, sounds almost bloodless, a matter of budgets and staffing, the sort of thing a company might announce in a quiet memo. Inside the family, it is nothing of the kind. Every role that is cut is a person. Every economy is someone's purpose, someone's home, someone's sense of where they belong, in the only world they have ever known. To shrink this family is to decide, Quite literally, who remains a royal in any meaningful sense, and who becomes simply a relative of one. And there is no gentle way to make that decision. There is only the decision. William, those who advise him say, approaches it with a coldness that surprises people who expect the warmth he shows in public. Not cruelty, coldness. The clear-eyed detachment of a man who has decided that sentiment is a luxury the future cannot afford. He has watched what affection and accommodation did to his grandmother's monarchy, how every kindness extended to a difficult relative, every role invented to keep the peace, every quiet arrangement made to avoid a scene, slowly swelled the family into something too large and too vulnerable to defend. And he has concluded, with the certainty of a man who intends to be proven right by history, that the mercy his predecessors showed was itself a kind of weakness. So when the logic of his own vision was followed to its end, it did not spare people because they were loved. It did not spare them because they had served, or suffered, or waited a long time for their place. It spared them only if the future needed them. And a former queen, honored but no longer essential, the widow of the previous king in a monarchy built around the current one, by that cold measure, however unfair, she is exactly the kind of figure a leaner crown is designed to move gently toward the margins. That is why her name kept surfacing, not because anyone put it there in malice, but because the machine of William's own reasoning kept arriving at it on its own. To understand why Camilla, of all people, kept surfacing on that list, you have to go somewhere the household almost never goes willingly. You have to go back to a woman who has been gone for nearly 30 years, and who has never, for a single day, stopped shaping the man William became. Every story about William, if you follow it far enough, arrives at the same place. It arrives at Diana. He was a boy when he lost her. And the people who have known him across the decades since all describe the same thing. A man who carries his mother not as a memory, but as a compass. Her instincts live in his instincts. Her causes became his causes. And her wounds, the ones the whole world watched being inflicted, left marks on her son that no amount of time or duty has ever fully smoothed away. It would be easy, and lazy, and unfair to say that William's vision for the future is simply revenge, that the boy who watched his mother suffer has grown into the man who will one day settle the account. Those closest to him insist it is not that simple, and they are almost certainly right. William is not a cruel man, and cruelty is not a plan. But it would be just as false to pretend that Diana has nothing to do with any of it, because the future William is building is one in which the values his mother stood for, openness, modernity, a monarchy that serves rather than simply reigns, are placed at the very center. And a future built around Diana's values is, almost by definition, a future in which the woman whose name was once set against Diana's finds herself with less room to stand. That is the nightmare, laid bare. Not that William hates Camilla, but that he does not need to. He simply has a vision of the future, and in the cold arithmetic of that vision, the case for protecting her fades a little with every year that passes. She is secure only as long as Charles lives. And after that, she depends entirely on the goodwill of a man whose deepest loyalties were formed in opposition to everything she was once made to represent. There is a memory that those who know William say sits close to the surface whenever the subject of the family's future comes up. He does not speak of it often, but the people around him can see it move behind his eyes. It is the memory of being a boy walking behind his mother's coffin, in front of a watching world, at an age when no child should have to do anything of the kind. He has said, in the years since, that it was the hardest thing he ever did, that he did it because he was told he had to, because the institution required it, because the machine that he will one day command asked it of a grieving child, and the child obeyed. That is the crucible in which William's idea of duty was formed. Not in a classroom, and not in a palace, but in the worst moment of his life, performed in public for the good of the crown. And a man forged in that particular fire tends to see the monarchy with a clarity that is almost merciless. He knows exactly what it costs, because it once cost him his childhood. And he has decided that if it is going to demand that much from the people inside it, then it had better be worth it, lean, honest, and strong enough to justify the sacrifices it extracts. You cannot understand his coldness toward the comfortable old arrangements without understanding that. He is not indulging a grudge. He is refusing to let the institution be soft with others in ways it was never soft with him. And Camilla, through no fault of her own, stands on the wrong side of that reckoning, a symbol, fairly or not, of exactly the kind of accommodation the young William was never once offered. Now, the news that such a plan even existed began to move the way these things always do. Not the document itself, which stayed sealed, but the shape of it, the shadow it cast. And as it spread through the household, it landed differently on everyone it touched. On Camilla, according to those who described those weeks, it landed as a cold and quiet dread. She is not a woman who panics. Those who know her insist. She has survived too much for that. But she is also not naive, and she understood the arithmetic as well as anyone. She had spent 20 years securing a present that could not be taken from her, and now she was being forced to see that the future had never been hers to secure at all. It belonged to William. It always had. And into that dread stepped the one man caught, as he always is, in the middle of everything. King Charles. For Charles, this was the oldest and deepest of his wounds, opened in the cruelest possible place. His whole life has been a long negotiation between the woman he loves and the family he serves, and he had spent decades believing he had finally won her a permanent place inside it. To be shown, now, that her place was only ever permanent for as long as he himself drew breath, that his own son held the power to undo it the moment Charles was gone, was to be told that the great project of his life was built on sand. Those close to the king describe a man torn in a way that even he, with all his practice at being torn, had rarely felt so sharply. To confront William was to risk a rift with his heir, the one person whose loyalty the crown cannot survive without. To say nothing was to leave his wife exposed to a future he would not be alive to shield her from. There was no move he could make that did not cost him something he could not afford to lose. And so, for a time, he did what he has always done best. He waited. He watched. And he said very little, hoping, as fathers do, that the storm might pass on its own. But this storm did not pass, because the person it frightened most was not willing to simply wait and see. To understand the weight of what she was facing, you have to remember what it had taken her to get here. Camilla's place in this family was not given to her. It was earned, inch by painful inch, across decades in which she was the most disliked woman in the country, blamed, caricatured, followed, and judged more harshly than almost any public figure of her generation. She had watched herself become a villain in a story the whole world was reading, and she had endured it, for the most part, in silence. She had waited years to marry the man she loved, and years more to be accepted at his side, and still more before the public would grant her even the grudging respect she had by then more than earned. And she had done it all by following a single, hard-won rule: never fight in public, never complain, never give the watching world the drama it was waiting for. She had built her entire rehabilitation on patience, on the slow, unglamorous work of simply showing up, doing the job, and letting time do what argument never could. By the time Charles became king and she became queen, she had turned one of the most hated names in Britain into something close to a national grandmother. It was, in its quiet way, one of the most remarkable image recoveries in the modern history of the monarchy. That is what the document threatened. Not just a title, and not just a role, but the security of a future she had spent the hardest years of her life earning. To be told, after all of that, That none of it might survive the man she married was a particular kind of cruelty. The cruelty of watching a lifetime's work rest on a foundation you were never allowed to own. What Camilla did next is the part of this story that surprised everyone who learned of it, and it is the part that reveals who she really is, beneath all the years of caricature. She did not fight it. She did not go to Charles in tears and demand he protect her. She did not enlist allies, or brief friendly voices, or do any of the 1,000 small things a frightened person in her position might have done to shore up their future. According to accounts later described within the household, she did something almost no one expected. She went, quietly, to William himself. Not to plead, not to argue, but to talk, directly, privately, and without a single witness, to the young man who held her future in his hands. What passed between them in that room has never been described by either of them, which is, in this family, the surest sign that something real occurred. But the outline of it is known. Camilla, by every account, did not defend her position. She did the opposite. She told William that she understood, that she had always understood, that the future belonged to him and his children, and that she had never expected, nor wanted, to be a weight around the neck of the monarchy he was trying to save. She told him that if the price of a stronger crown was a smaller place for her, then that was a price she was willing to pay, and had made her peace with paying long ago. She did not ask him to protect her future. She offered, in effect, to step out of its way. Those who have pieced together what that meeting must have been say the remarkable thing about it was its calm. There were no raised voices, because Camilla did not come to raise hers. There was no long list of grievances, no reminder of the years she had suffered, no appeal to fairness or to gratitude, or to the debt the family might be said to owe her. Came, by every account, almost empty-handed, carrying nothing but the truth of how she saw her own place, and a willingness to say it out loud to the one person most tempted to doubt it. She is said to have told William that she had never mistaken her position for a possession, that she had always known the difference between being given a role and being owed one, that she had watched his grandmother hold the greatest position in the land for 70 years and never once behave as though it belonged to her rather than to the country, and that she had tried, in her own far smaller way, to learn the same lesson. She told him she did not want to be the reason his monarchy carried weight it could not afford, and she told him, in words that those who heard of them have never forgotten, that she would rather leave with her dignity than stay as a problem to be managed. It was not surrender, though it might have looked like it from the outside. It was something stronger and stranger than surrender. It was a woman refusing to let her future be turned into a battlefield, choosing, at the exact moment she had the most reason to fight, to demonstrate the one quality the institution values above all others and can almost never teach: restraint, the willingness to want less than you could demand. And in doing so, she took the one weapon that could have been used against her, the fear that she would cling, that she would fight, that she would become exactly the kind of drama William was trying to build a monarchy without, and she laid it down, willingly, in front of the one person who could have used it most. To understand why that mattered so much, you have to understand what William had expected. He had braced, those close to him say, for resistance, for a fight, for the woman who had spent a lifetime clawing her way to the center of the family, to defend that center with everything she had. That is the Camilla the public was taught to expect, and it is the Camilla his plan had quietly assumed. And instead, he was met with something he had no defense against at all: grace. A woman offering to give up the very thing he had assumed she would never surrender, and offering it not as a tactic, but as a truth. It is very hard to build a nightmare around a person who refuses to be afraid. In the weeks that followed, according to those within the household, something shifted, not on paper, but in the harder-to-measure space where these things actually live. William did not tear up his plan. The monarchy he is building is still smaller, still leaner, still remade around the future rather than the past. That has not changed, and it will not, because it was never really about Camilla in the first place. But the place where her name had quietly gone missing was, by several accounts, quietly restored, not as a grand role, not as a battle won, but as a simple decision by a young man who had gone looking for someone to cut and found, instead, someone who had already offered to step aside. Because that is the strange mathematics of dignity. The surest way to lose your place in this family is to grip it too tightly, and the surest way to keep it, more often than anyone expects, is to open your hand. Camilla had spent 20 years learning that lesson the hard way, and in the one moment when it mattered most, she remembered it perfectly. Charles, when he learned what his wife had done, is said to have been quietly undone by it. He had spent the whole ordeal trying to find a way to protect her, and in the end she had protected herself, and him, and the peace of the whole family, by doing the one thing he would never have dared ask of her. She had made herself impossible to remove by making herself willing to go, and there is no defense, in any family, against a person who has genuinely stopped needing to win. Now, a story like this does not stay entirely hidden, and fragments of it, as always, escaped. Not the truth of that private conversation, which stayed sealed, but the shape of the fear around it. Within weeks, according to reports, versions were moving through the usual channels, that William had drawn up a plan that sidelined the Queen, that Camilla's future after Charles was suddenly uncertain, that the heir and the king were quietly at odds over the shape of things to come. Each fragment carried a piece of the truth, and none of them carried the heart of it, which was the last thing anyone guessed, that the crisis had been ended not by the king, and not by the heir, but by the woman everyone assumed had the most to lose. There is a detail from those weeks that says more than any of the rest. According to those familiar with it, after the matter had quietly settled, Charles is said to have asked his wife why she had done it, why she had gone to William alone, without telling him, and offered to give up the very thing he had spent his life securing for her. And Camilla's answer, in the version that reached the household, was as simple as it was devastating. She told him that she had not done it for herself, and she had not done it for William. She had done it for Charles, because the one thing she could not bear was to become, after everything, the wound that finally divided a father from his son. She had spent 20 years being called the woman who broke a family. She was not, she said, going to spend her final chapter being the woman who broke another one. That is the thing the caricature never allowed for. Beneath the villain the public was taught to see was a woman whose deepest instinct, tested at the worst possible moment, was not to take but to protect. And to protect not her own future, but the peace of the people she had joined her life to. The plan that was meant to expose her weakness had instead revealed her strength, and it had revealed it in the one currency this family respects above all others, the willingness to put the whole above the self. The public, catching only pieces, split as it always does. Some saw William as cold, a son settling old scores in the currency of the future. Others saw him as exactly the ruthless modern reformer the monarchy needs, willing to make hard choices the sentimental could not. Some pitied Camilla, cast once again as the outsider whose place was never quite secure. Almost no one imagined that the woman being pitied had, in private, been the strongest person in the entire affair. And yet it would be a mistake to end this story with the comfortable feeling that everything is now resolved, because it is not. The peace that Camilla bought with her grace is real, but it is not permanent, and everyone inside the household knows it. The plan still exists. The future is still William's, and the arithmetic that once brought her name to the surface has not changed. It has only been held, for now, at bay by a single act of dignity that bought goodwill but did not rewrite the underlying maths. Charles still reigns, and the day that changes, the whole question reopens, exactly as it stood before, only without the man whose devotion had kept it closed. That is the quiet truth beneath the happy ending. Camilla did not defeat the nightmare. She disarmed it. She turned a moment that could have destroyed her into a moment that earned her respect, and she bought, with a single conversation, years of goodwill from the one person whose goodwill she will one day depend on entirely. But goodwill is not a guarantee, and respect is not a title, and the future is still a country that belongs to someone else. What she won was not safety, it was time, and the knowledge that when the reckoning finally comes, it will come from a man who has now seen, with his own eyes, that she is not the woman he was raised to believe she was. Perhaps that will be enough. Those who know William say he does not forget things like that meeting, that a person who surprises him, who refuses to behave the way his expectations demanded, earns a permanent place in his revised understanding of the world. If that is true, then Camilla did something in that room more valuable than defending a role. She changed, in the mind of the man who will one day decide her fate, the category she belongs to. She stopped being a problem to be managed, and became a person to be reckoned with. And in a family where the future is always someone else's to give, changing how that someone sees you may be the closest thing to security there is. For now, the family holds its breath and carries on. The plan sits in its folder. The queen does her work. The king reigns, and loves his wife, and tries not to think about the day his protection of her will end. And the young man who will inherit it all goes on building the leaner, harder, more honest monarchy he believes is the only one that can survive, carrying with him, now, one small complication his cold arithmetic had not accounted for, the memory of a woman who, when he came to take her future, handed it to him instead. There is a final thing worth understanding about all of this, because it explains why the nightmare never became the disaster it so easily could have. The monarchy does not run on love, and it does not run on law. It runs on a much rarer thing, the willingness of the people inside it to want less than they could take. Every generation the crown passes into the hands of someone with the power to remake it, and every generation the survival of the whole fragile machine depends on the people around that person choosing restraint over grievance, dignity over drama, the good of the institution over the defense of themselves. Most families cannot manage this even once. This one has managed it, imperfectly and painfully, for 1,000 years. William holds the future. That has not changed, and it was never going to. One day the crown will be his, and the shape of the monarchy will be his to decide, and the people in it will stand or fall on his judgment. That is simply the truth of the line he was born into. But what this whole episode revealed is that holding the future is not the same as controlling the people in it, and that the woman he had quietly written out of his plans understood the institution he serves better, in the end, than the plan itself did. She could have made it a war. She had every reason to, and every right. Instead, she made it a gift, and in doing so, she reminded the young man who will one day be king of the oldest rule his great-grandmother ever lived by, that in this family, no one truly owns their place. They only hold it, for a while, with an open hand, and the ones who hold it most gently are, almost always, the ones allowed to keep it longest. William did what the future required of him. Camilla did what dignity required of her, and Charles, caught between them, watched his wife save the very thing he had spent his life trying to protect, by being willing, at last, to let it go. The plan still stands. The future still belongs to William, but the nightmare never came, because the one person it was built to frighten simply refused, in the end, to be afraid. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.